Good evening, my sleepy nights. Tonight, we delve into a true story in 18th century London, where a son's reckless Shakespeare forgery deceives the whole world. My name is William Henry Ireland, and this is my true confession. London in the 1790s still clung to its Elizabethan foundations, the era of Shakespeare, Marlowe, and the First Globe Theatre. Though now an ambitious imperial capital, the city still contained timbered buildings leaning over cobblestone lanes first laid in the bard's time. His fingerprints could be felt everywhere for those who knew where to look. My father, Samuel, was one who devoted his life to studying Shakespeare and his works. But, like others before him, he was thwarted by one crucial fact. No examples of Shakespeare's handwritten manuscripts had ever been found. Anything in Shakespeare's own hand would be the holy grail of Shakespeare scholarship. But the trail had gone cold centuries past. None of this seemed to dampen Samuel's zeal. He spent our family fortune amassing a vast collection of Shakespearean artifacts and texts, even dubious pieces supposedly once belonging to the bard himself. Father secluded himself in the musty estate library, poring over relics in vain attempts to glean insights into the enigmatic man behind the myth. Unfortunately for myself, Samuel cared little for his only son. I was but a constant annoyance to him, merely a distraction from his true obsession. He saw me as devoid of scholarly aptitude, and the family name destined to die with him. My attempts to engage him were brushed aside. My mother, Catherine, was my only source of affection, until consumption took her when I was still a boy. After her passing, our home was transformed fully into a monument to Shakespeare's genius. Walls and shelves overflowed with relics, both genuine and imagined, tied to his legacy. The few spaces not dedicated to the bard were filled with books, artifacts, and oddities related to history or the theatre. With mother gone, I had only the family housekeeper, Mrs. Cooper, to provide any warmth. She would bake me pastries and squeeze my shoulder affectionately while serving dinner. But father only picked at his meal, eyes gazed with thought, the food merely an annoying distraction from his pursuit of unraveling Shakespeare's mysteries. Since earliest childhood, I longed to somehow earn Samuel's respect and admiration. I even took interest in his scholarly obsessions, learning what I could of Shakespeare's work and lore, even as a young lad. I committed much of the bard's verse to memory through repetition, merely hoping to impress father. But he merely brushed me off with an indifferent grunt if I ever tried reciting a sonnet at the dinner table. My presence was a distraction from his solitary fixation. As I reached adolescence, my father made arrangements for me to begin work as a clerk. I believe he saw this as a way to occupy my time and finally remove me from the periphery of his pursuits. Though the work was dreadfully dull, the position did provide me with enough income to afford small pleasures away from home. A meal at a tavern, galleries with artists practicing their craft, plays staged at the theatre. These brief escapes kindled a small flame of creativity within me. Around this same period, we hosted a traveling American scholar named Mr. Benjamin Frey, who was visiting England to research literary figures from the age of the bard. Hearing of my father's renowned Shakespeare collection, he arranged to stay with us for a period of 2 weeks. While studying the documents and artifacts Samuel had so painstakingly acquired. I observed their learned discussions from the edge of the library. Father seemed more animated than I had ever witnessed, engaging with Mr. Frey late into the night over interpretations of Shakespeare's texts and theories. Father seemed more animated than I had ever witnessed, engaging with Mr. Frey late into the night over interpretations of Shakespeare's texts and theories about details of his life. On one evening, I gathered my courage and contributed a line I had memorized from A Midsummer Night's Dream, hoping to impress our guest. But Samuel merely told me to be quiet in front of our honorable company. After Mr. Frey's visit concluded, I noticed a distinct gloominess return over my father. The fleeting camaraderie he had enjoyed now extinguished, leaving him again isolated in his obsessive quest to unlock every mystery surrounding the bard's legacy. It was as this melancholy took hold that an idea slowly began forming in my mind. A dangerous, thrilling, outrageous idea that just perhaps could win my father's admiration once and for all. My idea was simply this. If no genuine manuscripts in Shakespeare's own hand existed, then I would produce them myself by any means necessary. Though merely an uneducated clerk, I fancied myself decently skilled with a quill. And I desired so desperately to revive the look of awe I'd seen briefly across my father's face while debating Shakespeare. Surely I could conjure at least enough skill to mimic an Elizabethan manuscript convincingly. Of course, it was utterly unscrupulous, an outrageous deception without question. Yet, I convinced myself no real harm could be done from fabricating just a small few artifacts. The risk was outweighed by the chance to finally bridge the yawning chasm between myself and my father Samuel. I began cautiously at first, preparing ink from oak galls using period recipes I discovered from the library archives. In the lonely hours after work on weekends, I practiced writing in the style of Shakespeare's era, studying published samples and imitating ornate scripts as precisely as possible. I acquired suitable parchment from a rather disreputable shop I stumbled upon near the docks, along with an impressive-looking quill said to be from the age of Elizabeth. After much trial and error, I settled on beginning with something modest. A short letter in Shakespeare's hand, addressed to his frequent collaborator, the playwright Ben Jonson. I referenced obscure details of their relationship found in Jonson's own biography, while folding in allusions that I thought might intrigue Samuel. Over many nights, I slowly copied and recopied the brief letter until I deemed it ready. Tomorrow would come the moment of truth. The day came when I prepared to show my father the forgery I had crafted. I presented it casually, explaining I had been contacted by a wealthy gentleman interested in selling some items. This anonymous benefactor, who wished to remain unnamed, had provided the letter I now handed Samuel, hinting there may be more writings stowed away in his attic. As my father eagerly examined the letter addressed from Shakespeare to Ben Jonson, I watched as his eyes grew wide with shock, hands trembling. He pored over the elegant script as if unable to believe what he beheld. When he finally looked up at me, His gaze held an expression I had never before seen directed my way. One of deepest pride and gratitude. In preparing this simulated artifact, I had hoped merely to bring the old man a bit of joy. But in that moment, I had sensed I had accomplished something far greater. Bridging the vast distance between myself and my obsessive, solitary father, if only by deceitful means. I knew then our domestic estrangement could be mended, given proper nurturing. My course seemed optimistically set. After much success with some smaller forgeries, I decided the time had come to attempt something grander. An extensive handwritten manuscript compiled under Shakespeare's name. I knew such an ambitious project could cement my father's legacy, or utterly destroy it if exposed. Yet, seeing my father, I could not stop now. I labored in secrecy for many months, painstakingly compiling excerpts from Shakespeare's printed folios into one cohesive manuscript. I referenced his recognized works frequently to inform my writing style and word choice. Of course, I aged the paper and ink to mimic centuries of wear. Once complete, I presented my master forgery to father with bated breath. When at last he finished reviewing the manuscript, Samuel raised his eyes to meet mine, now brimming with grateful tears. This work could validate his life's pursuits if deemed authentic. He quickly arranged a committee of renowned experts to scrutinize every detail. The day of their inspection arrived, and with it, my worry that my endeavour could be unravelled by the discerning minds of England's top Shakespearean authorities. The night before the scholars were set to inspect my meticulously crafted forgery, I lay awake obsessing over everything that could go wrong. Had I made some tiny but telling error that could betray the manuscripts as a fraud? Used a particular phrasing or dialect not used for Shakespeare's time? Did I select inferior materials not suited to the period? As the bedside candle burned low, my nerves burned even higher. Morning came, and with it the sound of carriages pulling up outside the drive. I took a deep breath and straightened my coat before entering the library. 4 esteemed gentlemen stood chatting with my father. The manuscript laid carefully on the reading table. Had I recreated every detail meticulously? The hours crawled by, agonizingly slow, as the scholars examined the work. They used magnifying glasses, made notes on terminology and writing implements. They debated subtle aspects of interpretation, only visible to their trained eyes. All I could do was watch helplessly, trying to discern any flicker of doubt on their faces. Finally, they completed their tedious authentication process and requested a private audience with my father. I excused myself from the room, pulse thundering in my ears, uncertain if I would be soon absolved or condemned. Either way, my fate now lied entirely in the hands of these four men. The suspense overwhelmed me. After a long, agonizing wait, my father summoned me back into the library, where the four authenticators sat with grim expressions. My heart dropped into my stomach. Certainly, they had seen through my forgery and would now expose the shameful deception. But just then, the elder scholar broke into a grin and proclaimed, "It is the unanimous conclusion of this investigative committee that the manuscript before us can be definitively attributed to the hand of William Shakespeare himself." I nearly collapsed from shock and relief. They discussed in scholarly terms the many aspects of the work that aligned with Shakespeare's diction, grammar, and subjects of interest. Even the corrections reflected his knowing editing process. In their expert judgment, this was no forgery. My father could not conceal his proud delight as he shook each of their hands profusely. News spread swiftly, and soon crowds were gathering daily outside our estate, hoping for a glimpse at the now famous manuscript. Leading literati made arrangements to travel from across Europe just for an audience with my father and his miraculous discovery. For now, my boldest gambit had succeeded through a combination of skill and extraordinary luck. But duplicity on such scale extracts a high toll. Already, I felt unease at keeping up this elaborate ruse, especially now in the glare of the international spotlight suddenly cast upon me. Whispers of skepticism circulated behind admiring mummers, but the focal point of all this anticipation sat waiting up in my bedchamber each night. My quill pen. And there was only one path it seemed capable of following now. In the weeks following the scholar's pronouncements of authenticity, our home became a hub of Shakespeare enthusiasts from across London and Europe. Father was constantly occupied with new admirers and researchers eager to glimpse his manuscript discovery. During a rare moment, he grasped me firmly by the shoulders, his eyes misting with emotion my boy. You have succeeded where countless others have failed. You have brought the world a lost piece of Shakespeare himself and restored luster to our family name. No man could wish for a better son. I knew then the die was cast. There could be no turning back now from this path. No matter how fabrication evolved into outright fantasy, the public craved more insight into the bard, and I alone could conjure it, whatever the toll on my soul. The private doubts that crept over me late at night mattered not. So long as I produced the dream that crowded guests now flocked to witness beneath our roof. Each visit emboldened me towards ever bolder deceptions. Soon, I was discreetly providing more artifacts. Fragmentary scribblings on ancient parchment, embellish anecdotes of Shakespeare's encounters with royalty and fellow writers, all enthusiastically accepted as genuine. My pencil traced lies, but conveyed greater truths about the human need for legends and mystique. Yet, I could sense the gathering storm as scrutiny followed fame. Connoisseurs with an eye for forgery whispered and watched for any misstep. Soon, they would need more than short samples. Only a masterpiece would satisfy them now. Attending a lavish party with my father, I tried mingling casually, but felt all eyes on me. Rumours had circulated about my hinted access to rare Shakespeare materials. As we conversed with acquaintances, they increasingly pressed for specifics about these supposed artifacts. With each evasive response, their questions became more targeted. Soon, a circle enclosed around us, peppering me with queries, asking to personally examine any handwritten pages I might possess, seeking revelations of my research methods. I offered only stammered excuses and deflections, but this only fueled their interest. I sought help from father, but found him relishing the attention rather than diffusing it. As the crowd pressed closer, hanging expectantly on my every word, I grasped for some revelation. Father was no aid, seemingly content to watch me squirm while he nursed the drink. "Well, what do you have to share with us tonight?" demanded a rotund fellow who seemed a benefactor of this lavish affair. "Only vague hints and empty teases so far." Others murmured in agreement. I loosened my suddenly tight collar, straining to maintain an air of confidence. "My good people, rumours have surely exaggerated the gravity of my modest contributions thus far, though I promise in time no more excuses, interjected a severe-looking lady as the crowd grew restless. We want to see more of these papers that you promised. Now, sir. I searched desperately for an escape from the enclosed circle, and without thinking, I hinted that perhaps there was a full unpublished play written in the bard's hand. Gasps rippled through the room. I knew instantly the trap had snapped shut on me. "Oh, don't keep us in suspense, man. Out with it," bellowed the man, nearly spilling his drink. Others chimed in, demanding I share more. Gulping the remainder of my wine, I loudly announced that I had discovered an unknown play, written entirely in Shakespeare's own elegant but hurried script. No sooner had I uttered the words, "unknown Shakespeare play," had pandemonium erupted. The various theatre managers in attendance instantly began clamouring to produce its premiere. "A discovery of this magnitude demands the grander stage. Drury Lane shall have the honour," proclaimed one esteemed gentleman. "Nonsense," rebuffed a manager from Covent Garden. "Our venue and cast are second to none. We shall make history." Within moments, it was an all-out bidding war, as they called out higher and higher sums in an attempt to secure the prestige of unveiling a brand new Shakespeare work. In my overwhelmed state, I simply nodded in acceptance as the figures grew dizzying. At last, the renowned Drury Lane Theatre won out, with an offer I could not possibly refuse. The deed was done, based solely on my drunken claim. Preparations would now commence to bring this imaginary play to life before all London. The next morning's headaches paled compared to the enormity of what I had set in motion. Expectations for a historical theatrical event were set, with sellout crowds already anticipated. There could be no discreet retraction of my reckless claims now. Father rushed me to find the manuscript. I bought some time, saying that the manuscript pages were hidden among many in the gentleman's attic. And so, I sequestered myself in the estate library each night, poring over Shakespeare folios and history books. I slowly crafted verse and dialogue as best I could in the bard's voice. Scene by scene, an original play emerged. Vortigern and Rowena. I aged blank parchment and bound it in cracked leather, making it look centuries old. I presented my handwritten forgery to Father with a wavering smile. She leafed through it reverently, face beaming. "My boy, this is... The critics will call this Shakespeare's greatest work." If only I shared his confidence. In a few weeks, the performance would commence, exposing my creation before all of London. My reckless reputation now rested on the skill of actors reciting lines. The Drury Lane Theatre buzzed with anxious energy in the weeks leading up to the much anticipated premiere of my forged play. The theatre owner had spared no expense preparing for what he assumed would be a historic Shakespearean production. Only the finest classically trained actors were cast. Intricate Elizabethan costumes and props were procured. Rehearsals ran long into the night under strict supervision. As opening night approached, all of London awaited with bated breath. Upper-class gentlemen flocked to the theatre to secure coveted tickets by any means necessary. Actors and producers from rival playhouses came to glimpse the unseen work ahead of the time. Scholars tried soliciting me for previews. Inside, I was a ball of nerves, but outwardly I played the part of the humble, earnest discoverer sharing his literary windfall. The much anticipated opening night had arrived. An audience of London's elite packed the theatre, eager to witness a new Shakespeare premiere for the first time in over a century. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as the lush red curtain rose. But the magic was soon broken. It became all too clear from the opening verses that even the actors themselves did not fully believe the words they spoke were a lost bard original. Rather than inhabiting their roles, the delivery felt flat and doubtful. Whispers, stifled laughter, and groans could soon be heard rippling through the audience as the nonsensical plot unfolded. By the third act, any remaining restraint had collapsed. Actors rushed through their lines. Others shouted fraud and rubbish. A few indignant gentlemen stormed out in a huff. I watched the horror unfold from the wings, my heart pounding furiously, soaked in sweat. I had staked everything on this performance, but my clumsy forgery was being ripped to shreds before my eyes. The final lines were barely audible over jeering as the curtain dropped, putting the audience out of its misery. It was obvious to all we had a debacle on our hands. Rather than a lost Shakespeare treasure, my credibility now hung by the thinnest of threads. all of London society would be eagerly awaiting my explanation. In the days following the disastrous premiere, I scarcely left my chambers, terrified to face the public ruin that lay before me. But there was no hiding from the brutal newspaper reviews. Critics derided every aspect of the performance as an obvious sham, thrown together by a desperate fraudster seeking fame. Prominent Shakespeare scholars pointed out inconsistencies, proving the so-called undiscovered work could not possibly be the bard's handiwork. No authentic details or sources could withstand the scrutiny now descending upon my claims. Father hardly appeared, secluding himself and refusing my attempts to gain audience. When at last he summoned me, I expected sympathy and concern for my plight. Instead, he lashed out, decrying me for tarnishing our family name, rather than delicately unwinding the lies. I had whipped the birdolatry into a frenzy, leaving him no way to save face. He demanded I fix what I had broken, then barred the study door behind me. In that moment, I saw the full scope of the disaster I had wrought, and my naive hunger for the old man's admiration. I considered fleeing England, disappearing forever on some ship headed for colonies to escape disgrace. But the debt I owed could not so easily be absolved. No, there was but one remedy left, however bitter. Tomorrow, I would visit the city printer and have him urgently prepare a public confession, telling in full tale of my undoing. If honour was to be salvaged from the wreckage, the truth must be liberated by my hand alone. The next morning, cloaked and hooded against unwanted eyes, I made my way to the printing shop just as the sun peeked over the roof tiles. The printer was startled as I threw back my hood, revealing my disgraced face. But he listened gravely as I described the confession I needed set to type, and distributed it immediately. He swore understanding and secrecy, then set swiftly to work as I scribbled line after line in his cramped office. The dammed up truth I held back for so long now poured forth. By noon, 200 copies were ready for dispersal, the confession still glistening wet with ink. I felt a surge of relief, as if a poison had finally been bled. Let the scorn of the masses come, I thought. The primal desire for honesty would protect me. Having at last overcome the countervailing compulsion for glory at any cost. Or so I believed. But as I stepped back onto the bustling streets with pamphlets in hand, a firm grip clasped my shoulder from behind. I turned to face my father's cold, angry eyes. "Come home at once, William," he seethed in a low growl. "We have much to discuss." The carriage ride home was silent, my father's gaze menacingly fixed on me the entire way. I shuddered, imagining what further castrations awaited. At the estate, Samuel manually locked the study door behind us. He paced slowly, at last unleashing his full fury over my betrayal. I had not merely embarrassed him, I had destroyed his life's work and legacy with my reckless thirst for fame. There could be no redemption now. I pleaded for mercy, swearing I had confessed the truth to salvage both our reputations. But he cut me off, laughing coldly at the notion I had acted nobly. "No," he sneered. This was simply self-preservation at the expense of his hard-earned standing. I had tarnished the family name. As he continued berating me, a glint of madness in his eyes, the true depths of his obsession dawned on me. This man would destroy me to protect his legacy. I had to escape. When his fury at last abated, I promised repentance, swore to make amends somehow. He dismissed me with a snort. The moment his gaze broke, I fled, mounting a horse and galloping off into the night. And so ends this confession that I wrote. The version I plan to publish, taking sole blame for the calamitous deception that had consumed me. However, the true story, known only to me until this day, is something more complex still. Something that I will share with you now. For though it was my hand that crafted the false Shakespeare play, I was merely an actor following a script. The true schemer, the insidious puppet master, who first conceived our grand ruse and stage managed each act, was none other than my own father, Samuel. Yes, it was he who had directed me to produce the forgeries. He who expertly fanned the flames of intrigue among London's elite. Samuel was the sole beneficiary of our dishonest fame, while I took the fall when catastrophe struck. I was simply Samuel's naive accomplice, drawn in by the chance to finally gain my aloof father's approval. In truth, my own involvement was little more than delivering the works he produced. When catastrophe struck after the failed performance, I agreed to take the full blame to protect my father's reputation. He warned me never to reveal his role, and that he would have to cut ties with me forever. Out of love, I took the sacrifice. In the end, my devotion to family honor had overridden truth. But no more. I write this now, my second confession, so the record reflects what really occurred. My naive complicity wounded our family gravely, but the deception was Samuel's alone. I hope this full accounting grants me some redemption.